Neurodivergent Moms, the podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Neurodivergent Moms, the podcast. Today I'm here with Silvia. Hi, Silvia.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's a pleasure, and I can't wait to start. I have so many questions for you. And I'm sure, everybody will learn a lot from this episode. So thank you so much. And could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and thank you so much for reminding me.
No.
So I'm Silvia. I'm the clinical director and founder of Psychology, which is a service that's based in Dublin. There is an amazing group of therapists, and we're all neurodivergent and queer. So we focus on supporting these communities, the LGBTQ plus community and the neurodivergent community. We're also kink positive, and we welcome sex workers as well. So I am a therapist. I trained in Spain as a general health psychologist, and I provide psychotherapy. And I'm also training as a pluralistic counselor and psychotherapy here in Ireland at the moment.
Oh, great. Sounds great. And an amazing, amazing project. So could you tell us a little bit about your connection with neurodivergence?
Yeah. So I feel like my work and this connection is the product of my experience in therapy, like as a client myself. Because I had been in therapy in Spain before moving to Ireland, which I think is a very different process. It was very, like my experience was very CBT and clinical based, like the medical model and things like that. So even though I didn't notice it at the time because it was a safe space for me, it was the only thing I had. I was dismissed a lot of the time or told that I was being difficult because I was showing neurodivergent traits, basically. So I would need to write things instead of speaking. Or I would find it difficult to make eye contact and things like that. I would talk about sensory overload, but I was dismissed by the therapist. And then after that, when I moved to Ireland and I started looking for a therapist, the process was also very discouraging because everyone I talked to them and everyone I told, I think I might be autistic, they had a similar response, which was, no, you're not, or we are all a little bit autistic, or everyone is autistic these days. So in the end, I found an amazing therapist, by the way, but it took me a lot of time and it was very discouraging. So I feel like this experience pushed me to put myself out there and to specialize in this and serving that community because I didn't really want anyone else to go through this experience.
It is a hard process, especially those comments about everybody's a little bit autistic, or I get a lot of, this ADHD thing is very trendy.
Yeah.
Those kind of comments.
That's another one.
Yeah. Definitely. And Silvia, could you tell us a little bit about your own diagnosis, if that's fine with you?
Yeah, of course. So about 3 years ago, it was 2021, my partner had been questioning if he was autistic for about 2 to 3 years at that time. So he'd been to a psychologist in Spain, but he was told the same. He looked at him for like 2 minutes, 2 seconds, and he was like, no, you're not autistic. So as he was thinking about these things, I saw myself a lot in those traits, and I was like, oh, but that's normal. Like everyone does these things.
Yeah.
And I was very like avoidant to my own neurodivergence. But in the end, 3 years ago, my partner was officially diagnosed in Ireland. And then as I was working as a therapist at that time, I started to get a lot of neurodivergent clients or people that were questioning, and I would see myself on them. And I was referring a lot of people to be diagnosed that shared the same traits that I have. So at some point I was like, I can't deny it anymore. Like this is everywhere, like this is me. So I started to accept it like 3 years ago. And then it was only this last May that I got an official diagnosis as autistic.
Yeah.
And I'm still in the process of the ADHD one because it's very hard and there is waiting lists and all of this. But I had a lot of internalized racism I feel to deal with, and it was just difficult to accept it at the time. So it took me a while.
I know, and this long waiting list. So I was saying before we started recording, I've been here only since March, but I already got the feeling that it's a very hard process, as you're telling yourself, and
Yeah.
the waiting lists are very discouraging because it is hard sometimes to really, feel ready to get diagnosed. And when that kind of way, when you're like, oh yes, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna go for it, and then you find yourself with all these barriers, right? The waiting list,
Yeah.
the denial, and all the difficulty in the process, which is very anti us, like all the way the process is being made and everything. It's very difficult for a neurodivergent person to go through it as well.
Yeah.
And have you ever felt different in terms of your neurodivergence during your childhood? Have you ever
Mm.
faced any difficulties, or how was that for you?
Yeah, as a child, so I was always the weird, shy child, and I thought, this is just me, and life is just, well, at some point I thought this is just me now, but then I will grow up and this will go away, because that's also what you're told sometimes. It's like, oh, everyone is like this. Like, I believe my mom is autistic, even though she doesn't want to say it. But she told me, I was like this as a child, and he's still like that. But this is what I thought, this is gonna go away at some point, and it's just and this is me.
Yeah, I know. It is hard. For me, like when I got my diagnosis, I only got it officially 2 years ago. And for me, it was like I was talking about this with a friend a couple of hours ago, because she was asking me like, oh, what did you think about getting a diagnosis? In what way it changed your life? And I was like, oh, I
Mm.
feel so much better now, even though I always felt different. Now I feel like I'm not broken, like
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with me. It's just I'm different and I need other things, and it's fine to be different. But I feel like I spent my whole childhood trying to not to be the way I am. And now that I got my diagnosis, I'm like, no, I'm gonna embrace the way I am. I don't know if that's something that you share.
Mm. Yeah, and I feel like also the imposter syndrome. So like you internalize there's something wrong with you, you're broken, and then you think, oh, this makes sense, it could be this. But you always have that little thing that you think maybe I'm not, I don't have this trait, or going through the process of the assessment and having somebody else say, in my case, it was like you have all the criteria. You don't have to, but you have all of them. So that really helped to make me feel seen, or like somebody else was acknowledging that part of myself.
Yeah. And it's very funny, like in your case, because you've also had other patients in your, as a
Mm,
psychologist, having
yeah.
the same traits, and the way that you were just mirroring yourself in them, I'm sure it was a very curious process to go through.
Mm,
For me,
yeah,
it was the
exactly.
same, but with my children. Like, my children are neurodivergent, and I was like, no, this is normal. Like everybody, this is, the norm. And then I remember I was in a meeting. I don't know if you, these kind of how do you call them? Not clubs, but there are a lot of kind of charities in Spain for giftedness, for example, or things like that. And I remember
Mm,
I was in a meeting for parents, and one of the psychologists there, she was like, I think you might need to take a look at this, because because I was like, um, these are not things that needs to be assessed, like this is the norm. And then she was like, no, it's not. So it is true that you go through all that, like, oh my, like the imposter syndrome and everything. So yeah, about the diagnosis now, I'm gonna step a little bit on this. As an adult, right? Like, what do you think it's in what way do you think it makes you it was good for you to get the diagnosis? Like, what were the, the bright side of it? Because I know it's difficult and you go through a lot of grieving and everything. But what was the upside of this, like, for you?
I think for me, it was just having the validation, having it on paper. And I know for other people, it's also getting accommodations. Like that's really important.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, if you don't have it as an official thing, you can't access those. So I'm self-employed, so I don't have that. But for example, for work, it's very useful for some people to get the accommodations that they need. Or if you're studying or even traveling, like there is. So I fly. I went to Spain this like a few weeks ago, And there is like the green card that you can use to travel. And, if you need help, you don't need to ask people. They see that and they know what it means. So there is all these things that you can't really access if you don't have that, it's really bad, but it's the way it is now.
Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah, that's very helpful. The accommodation, it's a very helpful thing, especially at work. Like I find that myself very difficult. Well, now I'm in the moment, I'm transitioning between jobs. I'm gonna start my new job on Monday, and hopefully this will be better. But it is hard when you're in an environment, like for example in an office, the smells, the
Yeah.
loud sounds, and then the schedules, all these long meetings, all those kind of things that yeah, can be really challenging. So in this world, like there's a lot of terms that we hear, that like neurodivergence, neurodiversity, and all that. And I wanted to ask you, as a professional person in this field, I wanted to ask you a little bit about neuroaffirming, because it's there a lot, and sometimes there's a lot of confusion about this. So could you tell us a little bit about what neuroaffirming means?
Yeah. So for me, neuroaffirming is an approach that moves away from the medical model that tells you that you're broken, that there is something wrong with you and you need to be fixed. And it respects all the different ways of thinking. So it's, for example, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, other things are seen as just natural variations of the human brain, just diversity of being human, instead of being something that you need to fix and something that's wrong in some kind of way, that you're flawed because you're like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it brings us, with the theory of the neurotypes, right? Like nowadays we can talk about different neurotypes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very clear. Thank you so much, because I feel like there's a lot of need in talking about the terms that we use, and especially sometimes I come across with a lot of people that when you say neurodivergence, they only linked it to autism.
Yeah.
Right? And then, it's kind of hard to talk about this and make people aware that there are many, many neurotypes, and even two autistic people don't have to be exactly the same, even though we have, some similar traits and everything. Yeah, I think it's very important to talk about the terms. I was also wanted to ask you about this, which I think it needs to be spoken at, and we need to give the voice to this. It's the same as neurodivergent. It's what is LGBTQIA affirming? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think in the same way that, neuroaffirming, LGBTQI plus affirming means that we support, validate, and respect all identities and experience. So specifically individuals who are not cisgender or straight, so people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, queer, or questioning intersex. There is many other things, but people that don't fit into these non-heteronormative, people that fit, into non-heteronormative sexual orientation or gender identity. So this goes from the basic, like creating a safe space, using the right pronouns, but that's not enough. I feel like it's also being informed about and competent about working with these people and what it means for them to navigate a world that is not really, it doesn't really consider those identities.
Definitely. And this made me think about teenagers, for example, because I remember that for myself, it was very difficult. It was a very difficult phase of my life, because as a teenager, you're already questioning yourself, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of your, sexual preferences or the pronouns and everything, plus the neurodiversity, like I feel like it can be a lot for a teenager. And I know that in Violet Psychology you work with this, and I feel it's great, and there's a lot of support and everything there that needs to be offered to teenagers. But also I was wondering, as a mom, right, like
Yeah.
what would you recommend? What would your recommendation be to a parent in terms of, supporting their teenager and giving them, the proper information and, a safe environment for them to express themselves, explore and share these with their parents?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the most important thing for me is that they educate themselves about it. So they take time to learn about gender identity, neurodivergence, or both, whatever it is. So understanding really what this means. So you can really support your child and you can help them navigate the challenges that they can have, or you might need to advocate for themselves. So you need to really understand what is this about, and listen to them without judgment. So like really being there for whatever they're going through, and understanding that this takes patience, I think, because for example, with gender identity, there might be, it's not black or white. So it might be changes that they go through and then it might feel like they're going back. It might be something fluid that the parent doesn't really understand. Or with neurodiversity, I feel like what happens a lot of the time is that um, sometimes the parents don't want to see, or they're not ready to see their own neurodivergency. So then they're like, oh no, you're not, or they dismissed. So it's really looking at that and being patient and being there for them with whatever they need, without judgment, with exploration.
Yeah, those are the very good advice. And are there any red flags that we need to be aware of that, our son or daughter is going through a tough time, that we, some kind of tips or red flags that parents should be aware of?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time what happens with this is that it looks like somebody's depressed, but then
Okay.
when you look underneath, so for example, with autism, I'm going to use that because
Yeah.
it's something that I work with a lot, but and other things. But there might look like so somebody's depressed, but when you look at that, is really that they're in autistic burnout. They're exhausted, they're masking a lot, they have a lot of demands. So when you look, I suppose the red flag would be that they look depressed, they don't want to engage with things, they're isolating from people. But it's really, for me, looking at what's the root of that. Because if you treat the depression, but you don't know that they're autistic and they're going through this is going to happen again. So I suppose somebody who's isolating, somebody who seems depressed, not engaging with things that they used to enjoy before, sensory overload sometimes, because when you're in that autistic burnout, you're more sensory, you're more sensitive to that. And then I suppose looking at somebody who's going through that journey with gender, it would be so talking about body discomfort, like body dysmorphia, their gender experience not aligning with the way they're feeling, or depression, anxiety, even self-harm sometimes is something that can really happen in those populations.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned self-harm because do you think there is a connection between these teenagers that are going through these tough times? Sometimes the coping mechanism could be self-harm, or could be maybe, using some, like they start drinking a lot, especially in these kind of cultures. Like I feel like, drinking is like very there, and
Yeah.
everybody accepts that, oh, like, oh, I'm having such a hard day, I need a drink. And it's something that it really worries me, because if you are a teenager, you're going through a tough time, and you feel like no one is listening to you, no one understands you. Maybe sometimes you can,
Yeah.
look for support in some other. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think especially because these communities are so stigmatized and not really understood. So I think looking for support is really difficult. So that's what happens, that there is a high, as you're saying, using drugs or things like that to regulate. There is a high level of percentage in those communities that do that, or also with suicide, sadly. So I think that the support is not there, stigma is really high. So these are the resources that they find to regulate themselves, which is it's really bad.
I know. Yeah, it is really bad, and yeah, suicides and all those. Oh, it's raising a lot. It's very sad. It's very sad that we're not giving the proper attention. Like, I think that this kind of information should be included at school,
Yeah.
right? It should be in the curriculum. And there is so much disconnection on an emotional level. And I feel like another coping mechanism is that it's just, turning on the TV, Netflix, all those kind of things all the time, scrolling all the time on your phone.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I feel like it's really there. It's culturally accepted, and we don't see that they're really going through a tough time and they need help. And as you were saying, it's very difficult to get help. So are there any places you think you could recommend teenagers to go to if they want to, look for help?
Yeah, there is different organizations. So here in Ireland, now that you ask me these questions, I'm gonna blank, of course, and everything is gonna be out of my mind. But I
Oh,
know
sorry.
it's okay. It's just my
It's
brain.
okay. But we can add these, I can add this information on the, at the end of the episode. So,
Okay. I know. So on the top of my mind now, there is TENI,
mhm.
and that's it. But I know there's a lot of more.
Okay.
But I can add those and send you those because my brain doesn't
They'll be
work like that.
running. We'll include them because it's really important to have these
Yeah.
details. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, moving on a little bit on my next question. This is something I experience a lot, and learning about this changed my life completely.
Mhm.
And it's the so-called rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. Could you tell us a little bit about what is RSD?
Yeah, this is something that I experience a lot as well. So,
Yeah.
so RSD is a condition that is triggered by perceiving that other people are criticizing us, rejecting us, or that somehow we're not meeting their expectations.
Mhm.
So it's characterized by overwhelming emotional pain. It feels really, really intense. It can be really difficult to manage.
Yeah.
And even when there is something objectively small or unintended, this can lead us to feel this way. So when we are going through it, I feel like there is nothing really that can stop it. You just have to leave
Go through.
leave it run its course.
Mhm.
And the term dysphoria means that a state of dissatisfaction, anxiety, or unease. So it's just something really, really strong and intense, and it's very common for autistic and ADHD neurotypes.
Mhm. It is. It is. It rings a bell. I suffered this a lot, and now, and once I learned about it and I recognize it, like, now I have the tools to say, okay, maybe this is this. I'm going through this. I'm gonna just let it go. But it's so hard. And as you said, like, you can actually feel physical pain and the anxiety, and oh my gosh, it's so true. And then one thing I realized no long time ago is that I also go through this as a mom. I get the RSD from my children sometimes, and it's so funny. Sorry, it's so funny because sometimes you're like, well, all these can happen to me as a woman, and I can experience these as a woman, but as a mom, no. As a mom, I need to be perfect, and I need to be like
Yeah.
really there. And for me, it's very important for moms and dads to know that it's okay. We're also human, and if we are neurodivergent, we have all these characteristics. We need to like really, really embrace them and try to cope the best that we can. But I think it applies to everything, like relationships. It applies to when at work a lot, and also it's completely linked to overthinking, right? Because you go into this loop and you won't stop thinking about it, and you're like, oh my gosh, look what I done, blah blah blah. And then maybe a week after you realize, oh no, that was RSD, and all is
Yeah.
good. Right?
And I think that's a good point about the perfectionism, because I think for some people that's the way they used to try to deal with that intense feeling that you want to get rid of. So it's like, okay, I'm going to push myself more and I'm going to do it better, and then this will go away. But it's just adding more stress to it, really.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have any tips that you can share with us to cope with RSD?
Yeah, I think so something that I noticed as well is that it impacts a lot our self-esteem and the relationship with other people. You might tend to isolate yourself because it's like, well, everybody hates me, so what's the point?
Yeah.
Or you might think that you're, awful, a bad person, boring, whatever is the label that you're using. So something that what I do for myself and what I talk with my clients is acknowledge, that this is happening. So when you know that this has a name, this is a condition, this is what's happening to me, you kind of know, okay, this is going to pass at some point, and this is just the way I'm dealing with this at the moment, but it's not going to stay forever. This is not who I am. And remember to be kind to yourself, which I know in that moment feels impossible and really difficult. But what I would say is, instead of trying to reason with that, oh, this person hates me, and trying to find all the evidence, because you're going to find it when you're feeling like that, is more being kind to yourself and thinking, okay, I'm feeling like this person hates me. That's really difficult. What do I need to do for myself because I'm going through this now? So it might be things like using a weighted blanket to regulate yourself, or doing something that you really enjoy doing. Special interests are really good for that. And managing sensory input helps a lot, because you're not adding more stress to your body, really. So that's what I would say.
Those are really, really good tips. And now that you mentioned the weighted blanket, I have that for my children. I have the children's one that, it's it is not as heavy as it should be, but I never thought I would enjoy that, actually. And lately I've been through, a lot of stress at work and everything. That's one of my um main reasons I'm changing jobs. It's been really hard for me, and I found myself more than once on the sofa with the weighted blanket. And I was like, oh, this is all I want. Even though it's for children, I should get like the other ones. But it's so comforting. Like, I really I really recommend this. It's amazing, the weighted blanket. And for me, it's like a very hot shower. It really helped me a lot.
Yeah.
It has to be like super hot. So these little things that also takes me to talk about the sensory profile and everything. It gives us a lot of information to take care of ourselves, and it's really, really important.
Yeah, that's very true as well. The sensory profile is something I recommend to clients to get, just to know your needs. And sometimes it's also, you kind of know this is what I need, but you've been used to being uncomfortable for so long that you think this is just the norm. And there is a bit of internalized egoism as well. So it's also good to remember yourself that you can do those things.
It is, yes, it is definitely. Very good. That's very good advice. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you this important question again for the parents community, because it can be really hard. It's really hard to go through, a lot of suffer yourself, but when you see your children struggling, it's heartbreaking. So I just wanted to ask you, what advice would you give a parent with a son or a daughter struggling with their identity recognition?
Yeah, I think it's also really important for them to find support for themselves. So even things like, going through therapy, but also going through support groups of other people that are finding these and connecting with others, so they can really feel understood. Because I feel like it's also not about getting judgment, or that they need to, of course, educate themselves and learn, but they're also going through this own process for themselves, so they need support with that as well, I suppose. So I think connecting with others and going through their own journey, that's also really helpful for them.
It is a really good advice. It is important because sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm the only one going through this. I'm the only, I'm the only person in the whole world. And then you talk to other parents and you're like, oh, I'm going through the same. And just to feel that you're being heard, and somebody else is going through the same thing. You're not alone. It's comforting enough. But I also recommend to people to start leaving their differences openly, because once you are like completely out there, you start attracting people with the same,
Yeah.
characteristics. So you create your own community. Like that was my experience. I was at the beginning, I was like trying to hide that I was neurodivergent, blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh, what people would say. And now I'm completely open about it, and I realized that all my circle, it's full of other neurodivergent people, and it's so great because you feel like you're on the same page, and
Mm.
I feel that it's time for us as a society, no matter in which country we are, to accept that difference is actually something good. And, we need to acknowledge that we are different and we need different things. Because I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, we need to be inclusive and try to put everybody in the same box. And for example, at school, right? It's like, no, all the children should be in the same class and should be in the same place. And it's like, but we don't have the same needs. Right? Like we are different, and it's for me, it's like enough of hiding this, and it's room for everybody, and it only brings good things.
Yeah. I think also hiding is really exhausting, masking or having to hide that part of yourself and making excuses, or it's really, really taxing, and it doesn't feel really like connecting then.
Definitely. Yeah. It's really important, and it helps your self-esteem a lot as well, because I feel, for example, that finally I know myself, and it feels so good. And I think that is one of the main things that we should get a diagnose, and we should get the support, and we should be open about it. I don't know, that's my opinion, my personal opinion about it. I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm sure you agree.
I do. I think the downside, I suppose, is the difficulty of accessing the diagnosis. Like, I think the cost is really high.
Yeah.
So, and even when you're able to access it, sometimes the person is not really informed about what it is. So they diagnose you with something else, or they tell you, no, you're not. So I think professionals are really are getting more informed, I think now, more and more, but there is still a lot of misconceptions, misdiagnoses, and for some groups specifically, like it's really difficult to get the accurate diagnosis. So that's my, but I think it's really important to know that you are neurodivergent. It really helps.
It is. And it is true what you were saying about getting a different misdiagnosis and everything, because I heard a lot of cases of people. I know a lot of people that had been diagnosed as bipolar, and they weren't bipolar. They were twice exceptional, and and most of them are ADHD, and they were diagnosed as bipolars, and they've been taking a lot of medicine and everything, and it's very serious. I think that the information should be there, and also they need to take a look at universities, and the degrees and the curriculums of the degrees, and everything needs to be adjusted and changed. And I think that teachers should also get some proper training on this, because at school you can really notice a lot of traits, and school can be very difficult for children. I remember my own experience. It's a lot of masking, especially for girls. Like we girls, we don't get to be girls. We don't get to be like, I remember seeing myself, like I was like, oh, I'm talking too much. I need just to keep a low profile, shouldn't be asking so many questions. I cannot wear this, I cannot behave like this, and you do a lot of masking, and you learn, like you become a master of masking. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think as well about the training that you're saying and the importance of that. I think it is really, and there is, neurodiversity or terms like that are being more and more popular. So people are using them, but sometimes what happens sadly is that they're not really informed. So you might see somebody who's saying, I am neuroaffirming and I do ADA. And I'm like, well, how is that possible? Because that doesn't really, so that's really dangerous as well.
That's true. Yes. Well, I have this little tradition in the podcast. I always try to finish with the same questions in terms well, it's individualized, but I always kind of wrap up with this. So the question is, what advice would you give to another neurodivergent professional that you wish someone had given you?
Yeah, it's a really important question, I think. So some things that I still keep telling myself now is embrace your strengths. That's, you are good enough, you're not broken, and that's being neurodivergent brings unique strengths to the table and things that you can use, creativity, attention to detail, problem solving, all of these things, out of the box thinking. So don't apply these, and really believe that these are things that can help you in your work or being who you are. Also things like setting boundaries and prioritizing your needs. So some neurodivergent therapists, for example, that I know are only able to work online because commuting, the social interactions, the sensory is really a lot. So I think that's really important to notice, that you have your boundaries and you need to prioritize yourself. And also don't be afraid to specialize in the things that you love doing. Like, I love working with neurodivergent people, but at the beginning I was really afraid to put myself out there only for that. So I would say don't do that. Just do it from the beginning because it's easier. And if you love your job, you're going to help more people and you're going to enjoy yourself more, and connect with others, with other neurodivergent people. I feel like that's really important.
True. That was lovely. And it is true. And I think like I've started to do the same myself, and little things as, for example, I was commuting a lot to work. It was like sometimes I was like 2 hours stuck in traffic. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And now I'm like, well, I just can't cope with this. Like, it's not good for me. I just can't, like, sensory wise. I was feeling my whole body super tense, like awful. And it is true that sometimes we are afraid of setting up boundaries and taking care of ourselves. You're like, oh no, but it's too much. I shouldn't have said this. And it's, if we don't take care of ourselves, who else is gonna do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so important. Well, this has been great. I feel like you help us a lot with all these terms, and hopefully this will help to all, this would bring some help to all the people that are there listening to us. Silvia, I just wanted to ask you if someone wants to reach out or where do you have any Instagram account or something when people can find you?
Yeah, so we have Instagram, we have Facebook, and we have a website, so they can go to www.violetpsychology.com. And then the Instagram is, I think it's violetpsychology_Silvia, and we also have a general one. But if they go to the website, everything, like all the information is there, so they can send us an email or send us a DM or whatever is comfortable for people. We also have some free resources that they can download, and there is also some low-cost resources for people to look at. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, I add these also to the episodes and information. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been great. Hopefully this will be the first to many.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Silvia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again. Take care. Bye.
Neurodivergent Moms, the podcast.